Hey friends, this is Mary Aaronworth. I'm Senior Deputy Director at the Reading and Writing Project, and I'm here today with a couple colleagues. Sarah Picard-Taylor and Arlen are going to be videotaping for primary, and Sonia Cherry-Paul and I are going to be, Arlen Casimir, I'm sorry, and Sonia Cherry-Paul and I are going to be videotaping on behalf of 3 to 8. First, I just want to say that we are so proud of the way teachers are responding to this crisis, to this pandemic. And we know it is really hard. I mean, some of you have elderly family that you're worried about. Some of you have kids at home. My college kids are home, and just having the two college kids and the dog and my partner just feels like this is impossible, but it's not impossible. We have to do it. I can't imagine for those of you who have young children at home trying to manage the job that you're teaching and the kids that you actually have to have at home. So just thank you to all of you for every moment that you are working through this stress and going forward, because we know it's so hard. But just like, I mean, I'm a New Yorker, so having been someone who came through September 11th and came through Sandy with our schools, there are real moments of beauty. People are being really good to each other, and that, let's hold on to that, because you do see that. You do see it in these moments. You see people, one of my staff developers, I talked to Sarah this morning and said, Sarah, are you thinking about going home to Wisconsin? And she said, I've got elderly neighbors in my building and I don't feel like I can leave because I want to make sure that we're there to check on them. I mean, that's the kind of thing that people are doing for each other, and I think that's so beautiful. So today I want to help you a little bit, or at least provide you with a little bit of shared knowledge. I mean, all of this is knowledge that a lot of you have been building. We work with thousands of schools, of course, around the world. And so a lot of our schools have moved to remote learning weeks ago or even a month ago. And there are some things that we're learning from that that we thought would be helpful for you. So we'll talk about a couple of things. One thing we'll talk about for a second is just reading and writing workshop and how those might go at home. And the second thing we'll think about are some embedded tips for parents. And then third is just tucked into this, how can we make sure that we're increasing equity and access for all? So to start with, let's think about reading and writing workshop at home. This is probably, especially if you're just moving to remote learning or virtual learning or digital learning, whatever your community is calling it, online learning, this is probably a really good time to think about what matters most in terms of reading and writing workshops. So bring yourself back to the big picture here. What matters most is that kids are writing a lot and reading a lot, and that they're reading things they love and they're writing things that make them want to write. None of this is going to work if the kids don't love the books they're reading or don't want to read. Nor does any other part of our curriculum matter quite so much right now as making sure that kids have books in their hands and are able to read, or text, or some kind of digital text. So let's talk about writing workshop just for a minute. Some tips that you can pass on to your families to get started are, it can be really helpful to talk with your families. Maybe you want to make a little bit of a video about what it looks like to create a little writing space. I mean, we've got 4 people sharing this space, and so we've had to create one little shared corner where Lauren can work, and another one where Jack can work, and another one where my partner Rich can work. And all of us are doing both online. So imagine all of us on different Zoom classrooms and Google classrooms, and one's on Schoolology. We have different platforms we're all using, but everybody's talking into their computers and tied to their devices. It's creating a lot of tension, and it's easier for us than for so many families. So talking to families a little bit about how you might carve out literally a physical space. For your youngest writers, a lot of what's going to happen is they'll get a lesson or they'll get some direction, and then they need to go off and do some writing. So where's the place where they might do that? So thinking a little bit about having some paper around, having some pens and paper, like that makes a little writing center, this notion that your families can make a little writing center to the best of your ability. And the most we can for our kids in the conditions that we have. I mean, we oddly left our house, somehow we left my office with no paper. So we're like a paperless household, which is not perfect right now. So we're trying to figure that out. And there'll be families that that's true for too. So always offer more than one possibility. You can't just say to families, make this beautifully well-stocked writing center with Post-its and with paper and with many pens. Or it might be, make a quiet corner where your child, when she's working on her digital device, feels like this is her writing place. The beautiful thing about writing, I mean, I know as someone who's writing professionally all the time, is it used to be we all wanted a perfectly quiet place to write, but really what we want now is, I mean, I do a lot of writing. I've written books that are, I feel like they were written mostly in airport lounges, is you just need a place where you feel like this place is my own little cabin in the woods. This chair or this corner or this place where I sit now with my device, probably. Although some of our younger kids will be writing on paper still and then sharing in other ways. So holding on to that for big sense of like that writers need a place where they can write and a place where they feel like this is where I get a lot of writing done. Then there's the question of what will they be writing about? So there is something to be said for continuity of curriculum. Like we know some of our schools, they went right on with lesson two. They were on lesson one before schools closed. They went on with lesson two. Or if they were on lesson 12, they went on with lesson 13 of their unit of study that they were already teaching. And listen, continuity can give kids a lot of comfort. That can be, we sense a lot of insecurity in kids, and we had a lot of that in other times of crisis. We've seen this in other places of the world we've worked, that it's so continuity can be good, but also a lot of kids are anxious and scared, and so are families. So it may be that you want to have either a strand of independent writing or a day a week of independent reading, or you start for the first 2 weeks with some independent writing, and kids and families are allowed to write about the things that are on their mind. Emily told me, Emily Butler Smith, one of our colleagues, she's home with her daughter and her son, and she said that yesterday they made a time and they all sat down and they all wrote, what are we thinking about what's happening around us? And it was really helpful. So this notion of that this might be a time for personal narrative and for poetry to reemerge for a little bit before you dive back into your lit essay or your argument essays. I mean, kids have a lot on their mind, and the beautiful thing about writing is it helps us hold on to beauty and it helps us write through trouble. So keep that in mind with your curriculum. Think a little bit about the big work of writing, which was to help kids feel like their lives are worth writing about. And then you can get back pretty soon and pretty quickly into the lit essay or the argument essay or whatever it is that you wanted to be writing. If you've already gone with continuity, that's great. But do keep in mind that you probably want some thread of independent writing going on so that kids have an outlet for all of the stress and the worries that they're finding and ways to communicate with each other. Um, let's do big picture reading and then we'll go into some practical things. So same thing with reading. I mean, you might have been going right into a mystery unit, but now you find that not all your third graders even have books. Like they don't have mystery books. They have other books, but they don't have mystery books. So this would be a good time to be flexible to say, like, maybe we're going to do a couple weeks of independent reading or partner reading, or maybe your next book club unit is going to be a genre based and kids can sign up like these kids want to read fantasy together. These kids want to read graphic novels together, or they want to read historic fiction together. So a little bit of flexibility is going to go a long way, and you can still keep going with really high level reading workshop. I mean, the big work of reading is that kids are holding books that they love. They read them fast and furiously. They talk to other readers. So that's our goal. We'll talk about access to books and equity around that in a minute. If you were lucky enough to send books home, that's so beautiful. If you have a couple days before your school closes, anything you can do to send, empty your libraries and get them into kids' hands. This is the time where it's better to lose a book than to lose a reader. Like readers are more important to us than any of these books. We can replace the books. We can't replace weeks or possibly months of kids not being able to read. Um, so the big work of reading is going to be that you're going to want to be able to do some mini lessons. You're going to want to be able to do some read aloud, and you're going to want to get your kids into either partner or clubs. So that's going to move us now into just making sure that you get really abreast of your tech really quickly. And fortunately, honestly, when you want help, entice some of your kids to become tech experts. The biggest thing we see with teachers is they feel insecure about Zoom or about Google Classroom or about Schoology. I can tell you, you're going to get good at it really quickly, and you don't have to be expert on day one. You just have to get started. I would invite some of your kids in each classroom to be little local tech experts. If you're doing a Zoom call, you can even make them co-hosts so they can be like getting kids into breakout rooms. If you're doing Google Classroom, some of your kids can become expert on how do we create little discussion groups. I mean, their kids will be really good at this, and it'll be good work for them to become expert at this, even more expert at this. So let's talk for a second about these platforms and how you're going to want to use them, or how you might use them. So what we're seeing from teachers who have been in this for many weeks now is that there's two main ways that you might be preparing lessons and materials and instruction for kids and feedback for kids. So one way is what we would call live, and one way is pre-recorded, or we might call that synchronous, where we're all on at the same time, and asynchronous. And let's just talk about the advantages and disadvantages of both, because I think you're probably going to want a hybrid no matter what you've already decided. And the reason for that is if you go only live, it is going to create equity issues. If you have a kindergartner or a second grader who's at home, but meanwhile their family is also working from home, maybe they even need that device for a moment. It's not really fair to say your child can't learn unless the whole family can do this from 9 to 10 at this day. Like you want some portions of your curriculum that you have recorded probably so they can access them later. At the same time, recorded learning is not nearly as enticing as live learning, especially because you can get kids involved together in discussion groups. Although there's nothing to say that you couldn't have an evening discussion group for fifth graders or an evening discussion group for kindergartners if it turns out some of your kids need this. So the main thing is you probably want a little bit of hybrid of some things that are recorded so that you're recording them at any time, maybe even just are recording what happens live. I mean, hit that record button and record what happens live so that families can get into it later, because flexible scheduling is going to be really important. And we're hearing that from all working families, which is most of this country now. Being at home and trying to manage all this is going to be really, really tricky. So, tucked into this is for our families that are already home and doing this for a while, and even for our staff. One of the things that's really coming up is that it can be really lonely and it can be really isolating. So, really thinking about how you're going to use your functionality. It's your discussion groups, it's your breakout rooms, so that you're setting up probably pretty reliable partnerships, small groups, and maybe even pods where kids and adults are able to get together and interact. This will be a really good time to set kids off to go talk about their independent reading or their book club book or talk about their writing with each other, and then duck into those rooms and listen in. They can also respond via chat features. They can be entering their feedback and their discussions, as well as videotaping back and forth. And it's going to take a few days to figure it out, but you will figure it out. Everybody is figuring it out. I mean, fortunately, we live in an age where we have the kind of tech that at least we can actually do that right now, when we can get kids into discussion groups. So the other thing is probably checking in a lot as kids are getting started, because you're going to find that you set these groups up and then two kids aren't there. So one of the things is, we have found oddly that moving from partnerships to groups of 3 or 4 can sometimes be pretty helpful, because then if one kid is having tech trouble, the other child isn't just sitting there with no discussion groups. So you might go to very slightly larger groups just for the first week or so while you're figuring this out. But checking in and seeing how people are doing, checking in and seeing how families are doing so that you're problem solving. Be ready to manage your own stress inside of this. As someone who has been leading a lot of virtual learning recently, and our staff has as well, when you are trying to teach a lesson, so you're trying to read aloud, so you've got this read aloud, you're trying to read aloud to your kids, or you're trying to give this mini lesson, which you're like doing live right now. And meanwhile, 3 kids are talking to you in a chat box, or their parents are talking to you in a chat box saying, "We can't hear your audio. Something's not working on our computer." You feel like you're an air traffic controller in an airport that has no rules. I mean, it's just so incredibly stressful at the beginning. So another tip we'll give you is schedule regular breaks and times to have a little like, okay, I can't deal with our tech problems right now. I'm going to go on with our read aloud. And at the end of this, I've hit record. So you'll be able to watch this later. Um, because it starts to feel like you're trying to manage the chat box, and you're trying to manage the breakout room, and you're trying to manage your own instruction. And pretty soon you're barely thinking about your content because you're so worried about what's going on with you, with all the technology around you. So just know that's going to happen, make your peace with it, and develop some protocols. It might be that you've got a little chat room going, or you've got a place where if families and kids are developing technical difficulty in the middle of your lesson or your work, they know that at the end of every hour, the last 10 minutes are going to be tech trouble. But you're not going to stop your lesson right now, because that's going to be so disruptive and so stressful. So you might just practice some of that stuff and just be ready for that, because we're finding it pretty disconcerting to be in charge of all the tech and in charge of all your content. Now, the stuff that you pre-record, that's also a way to have a little sense to breathe, because you've pre-recorded a little bit. All right, so if we're thinking about big picture reading and writing workshop, we've talked about that you want to be focused on getting books in kids' hands, and you want to get kids writing right away, which might mean more of an independent curriculum right now, as in the independent reading and independent writing for a little bit. Then pretty soon you are going to be getting into your curriculum, and at that point you could either do flipped lessons. So there is something to be said for the flipped lesson, and one thing that I think is to be said for the flipped lesson, which is where you pre-record it, is that then you have recorded this lesson where you're actually calm and you're able to breathe, versus in the moment trying to manage everything. So the advantage of that is you recorded it, but you have to pause and say in the middle of it, now is when you should pause and you should go talk to a partner. Or it could be that you're going to do your lessons live, but if you do them live, and I think that's beautiful, because remember, just like school, this doesn't have to be perfect to be lovely. You're doing the best you can, and live with a little bit of trouble along the way is totally fine. But I would try to record them as you're going. If you're in Google Classroom or Zoom, just hit record, because that will be really, really helpful. In a worst case scenario, just set your phone up and record them, and then I'm I'm videotaping this, and right now I have my phone videotaping this, and I can just upload that to my Google Drive for later for teachers and for colleagues and for kids. So let's move to a little bit of checking in with families and flexibility with families, and then equity around this. So, in a perfect world, you had enough warning that you were able to empty your libraries and send those home. Or you're in that work right now, or you're figuring out how to do that. So the biggest concern is that there's equity around kids actually having access to print at home. So let's just talk about ways to do that. So one way to do that is you sent your library home. That this would be a good time to do that. A second way that you might do that is there are families who will be able to order a book on Amazon. So if you're posting your book clubs and you're like, who can buy a book? And then please list who could buy a book for someone else so that they could, so that we can, I mean, there will be families that'll be like, I'll buy the book clubs I'll buy this 4 books for this club. So it could be that some parents will buy books for clubs rather than individual kids. I think that would probably create a lot more equity, is like, we're buying these books for our clubs, and once we get all our club books, then we're going to be into books. Another thing is use your local libraries, and we're using Overdrive in a lot of local libraries. Libraries are moving heaven and earth, and authors are being so generous to get digital versions of their books up so that kids can get these books for free. And then lastly, use your Padlet or your Google Drive, whichever one you're using, or maybe you're using a different platform, to get as many shared texts up as possible. So you can be linking kids to videos that are online, to short stories that are online. So that will be another way for kids to get access to text. As that will be really, 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 really helpful. So then finally, let's talk a little bit about checking in with families. We mentioned it briefly, but we just don't know the different stresses that families are going to feel as they get started. So will you think about making sure that you've got regular check-ins to talk to kids and families about just how's it going? It could be that you set up your Zoom call or your Google discussion 15 minutes before class starts so that kids can actually talk about this, to each other. It could be that you've scheduled what would have been recess for kids to also have a time to talk. It could be that, I'm just going to pause for 1 second. Okay, I'm pausing. I had to pause to answer the door for a second. By the way, the thing that hopefully you didn't hear, but you might have heard minor cursing there. One of the things to be really careful as a teacher when you're on all of these recordings and digital devices is just assume that your audio is always live. And the people who you've muted out or that you think you've stepped out of a breakout room, just assume that you haven't. Because the last thing you want is, and I can tell you it's happening everywhere, is you gave this great lesson and you thought it had stopped recording, and at the end you're like, God, that was hard. Like, that's not what you wanted it. Or like, wow, I can't believe this person is being so difficult. And meanwhile, it's still recording. So just assume that everything you say at this point is actually live, and it will keep you from getting in the kind of trouble that others have been getting into. Okay, last thing was just checking with parents and kids. So you just build in regular time. And then our final piece of advice, it's related to workshop, only that being tied to your computer is more psychologically and physically stressful than we really imagined. So there are kids who love devices. It's interesting and ironic, and there are adults who love devices, but when you know you can't leave it, it feels really different. So really be thinking through, okay, my workshop, I had my 10-minute mini lesson. Now the kids are going to go off and read or write. Probably halfway through, I'm calling them back, or they're having a partner talk in the middle, or I've set it up so like they've watched my lesson, my flipped lesson, and then they're going to go read and write whenever that time is. And this is the time at which we're talking about our writing, because you could have just said, by tomorrow at 12 o'clock. That's when you need to have your writing done. And kids could have worked on it any time during the evening too, because we're going to have a lot of flexibility around this. But at that time, after you're done, maybe you want to do, and now we're going to do a little yoga, or now we're going to do some exercises, or now we're going to move around a little bit. I mean, you see all these great videos around the world of people doing things like that. And our kids are going to need that too. Everybody needs release from stress. Everybody needs connectivity. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to my treasured colleague, Sonia Cherry Paul, and she is going to talk a little bit more about connectivity. Thank you so much.